One of the most heartfelt deaths of a video game character is that of Arthur Morgan, our hero of Red Dead Redemption 2, and what came as a bit of a surprise to most was that the story didn't end there. Fast forward 8 years, and players took control of John Marston, the protagonist to the original Red Dead 1, in the epilogue of this title. Although gamers were happy to continue life in this world, there were a fair handful who expressed a disinterest, and today we're going to talk about the reasoning behind this. Welcome to the video. You're listening to Phil of Philby Gaming. If you guys enjoy the following, be sure to hit like, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. I want to point out quickly that I myself did enjoy the epilogue portion, but there are some points made that I do agree with in respect. Now, with that being said, and with the intention of not making this introduction overly long, let's get into what we came here to see. Firstly, let's talk about the opening mission, the wheel. After putting potentially anywhere from 60 to 100 hours in as Arthur Morgan, and then watching him pass away following an action-packed mission, we're given mere minutes to comprehend what just happened before we take control of John and are given our first task: to deliver groceries. It was just such a drastic change of pace that I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Following this, John finds employment on Pronghorn Ranch, where both he and his family now reside. I understand what Rockstar were doing here, trying to show John as a changed man, but what it felt like was that the entire game was starting over. In the prologue of RDR2, when the gang arrive at Coulter, it intentionally slows its pace to introduce us to the gang members, giving us time to get to know everyone individually. This is done very well, but it seemed totally unnecessary to do this again in the epilogue, as we were already familiar with John Marston and his family. The majority of the first portion of the epilogue plays out like this. It just seemed overstretched. With this change of pace, our character change took us from a badass gunslinging Arthur to John now milking cows. Of course, we aren't limited to staying on the ranch, so to speak, but during part 1 of the epilogue, we might as well have been. If you do venture out, you'll notice John doesn't have access to his weapons just yet. You can't buy guns from any of the smiths, or in general, you can't really buy anything from anyone just yet, even if you manage to obtain some cash. I appreciate that this is done in order to flow with the storyline, but extending the game for 2 more chapters and then limiting your accessibility in one seems unfair to the player. Once again, this is very similar to going back to Coulter, where we could only do a small portion of the things we wanted to. Secondly, let's talk about the character of John Marston himself. Players of the original Red Dead Redemption will remember John as being quite the badass, but let's be honest, it's not the same person in the epilogue. He seems more whiny and timid at times. I appreciate that the man is trying to change for his family and create a better life for himself and those he loves, but he seems just a mere shred of the protagonist we once knew and loved. Although his intentions are good and I understand what he's trying to do, I don't understand his persona at this point. For starters, he's absolutely bullied and berated to death by Abigail, even when things aren't his fault. Let's look at the opening mission again. After delivering the groceries to Pronghorn, a couple of thugs arrive and steal his cart. There's very little violence involved when retrieving his property, but Abigail still scolds him, barking at him that he's throwing his weight around. It happens again later when the thugs return and begin attacking the ranch hands. John is simply defending the people who not only employ him, but home him and his family too. Once again, in Abigail's eyes, John is at fault. He can't seem to do right for doing wrong. The time difference between the death of Arthur and the now playable John is 8 years, but Rockstar left us with so much unanswered for during this huge timeline. All we know is that John killed a man somewhere in Roanoke Ridge, but the reasoning is unclear. Nothing else whatsoever. We aren't even given an explanation as to what happened to the daughter of John and Abigail. There's no mention of her at all. Maybe this was something that Rockstar intentionally wrote out of the character. Even Rob Wheatoff, the actor who portrayed John, when questioned about the daughter, he admitted he'd totally forgotten about it. The entire 8 years is just a void, it seems. Closing the first portion of this two-part epilogue, John, whilst with his son, is confronted on the road by some men who intend to exact revenge for the killing of the Roanoke man, and in turn, John puts them all down. Abigail, because of this, believes enough is enough and takes herself and Jack out of the equation. This again doesn't make much sense. I absolutely believe that she was right in doing so, but how many times have the gang over the years brought trouble to their own doorstep, such as the Pinkertons raining fire on them at LeKay? Why didn't she up and leave then? Again, because Rockstar don't explain to us the 8-year gap, and in particular the reasoning behind the Roanoke Ridge incident, we can't make full sense of her decision making. There's just too many blanks. The one good thing to come from this is that very shortly after, we are now given full access to the free roam, although almost one half of this two-part epilogue is already completed. John sports his original RTR1 outfit and all of our weapons are back in our possession. But here's the kicker. All horses stabled by Arthur Morgan are no longer accessible, which most didn't like. Now I understand that it's been 8 years, but an average horse's lifespan is 25 to 30 years, so they could have been crossed over into the epilogue. It's possible to do it with Buell, Hamish Sinclair's horse, so why not the others? I really liked John's hair in the main game, so as soon as I was able to do so, I visited the barbers, only to find that his original hair couldn't be matched, and the game only had the original styles that were in fashion when we played as Arthur. Aside from the hair and the beard, John's facial features didn't look like they did in the main game. The structure of his face is different, although to be fair, part of this could be down to the weight gaining / losing system, so I won't get too much into that. With New Austin now accessible, most players who enjoyed the original, much like myself, wanted to head south and revisit some old locations. Some of the stops on this little road trip turned out to be pointless. Key locations from the original title, such as the town of Armadillo, Thieves Landing and McFarland's Ranch, seemed a lot quieter than they used to be. Armadillo is run down with the cholera outbreak, so it makes sense to close most of the accessible buildings, although I'm not sure why this was a thing in the first place. Thieves Landing is not the activity-filled community it was in RTR1. It's basically just a dock surrounded by the Del Lobo gang. McFarland's Ranch seemed much smaller than it would be 4 years later. There was no general store or large barn. One big thing that most were disappointed with was the lack of Mexico. Unless you use modifications or trickery to glitch the game, you couldn't even access the country. If you did somehow manage to make it across the San Luis River, the entire place is still deserted. The only structure to be found, or that I could at least, is a half-rendered El Presidio fort, which some may remember as the place where John caught up to Javier Escuela in RDR1. As the story progresses, in part 2 of the epilogue, John is reunited with old gang members such as Uncle, Charles Smith and Sadie Adler, but there are more to be found. Tilly, Pearson, Mary Beth and Rainsfall can all be encountered, but each interaction is very short-lived, which doesn't make sense. In all the meetings, aside from Pearson at the road store, the short scenes are rushed. After only a minute or so with reuniting with the old gang, they are scurried away by either train or trolley. I think that Tilly sends a letter later to Beach's Hope, but Rockstar could have taken more time with this. It's understandable that they are living their own lives, but why such a brief cutscene? As I said, it felt rushed and only put in place for closure to the player. It's strange to do this for some players, as some feel that the epilogue itself was too long. Why make it this lengthy if they're just going to rush portions of it? It doesn't add up. Also, there seems to be plot holes in the final mission too, where John and friends track down and kill Micah. The reasoning is there of course, but Dutch's actions don't make sense. At first, when Dutch shoots Micah, he saves both John and Sadie before walking away, so why then, 4 years later, does he seem hell-bent on killing his former brother? He could have just done it on the top of Mount Hagen. All in all, the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 has its ups and downs. As stated at the beginning of the video, I myself enjoyed it, but some of the points made today are ones that I agree with. There are some very good parts to it, such as learning the fate of the former gang members, the fact that you can retain most of Arthur's belongings, and side quests triggered by Arthur can be later completed as John, after triggering a new scene too. It's also allowed players of the original to relive memories in New Austin and make new ones, such as visiting the town of Tumbleweed, which became a ghost town a few years later. Anyway guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and if you did, you all know what to do. Let me know in the comment section below if you yourself enjoyed the epilogue of the game, or if it wasn't for you, and if you wish to get in touch, you can find all social media links in the video description below. Thank you all for watching, you've been listening to Phil, and I'll see you in the next one.